Hey, everybody, welcome to Nightlight Weekend Wisdom. We are your fearless hosts for this weekend, Alexandra Blair and Whitney Kranz, holding down the fort to talk about Capricorn dignities, baby. Are you ready, Whit?
We made it. We made it to Capricorn season. And it's just an uphill climb from here, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I doubted we'd make it, but here we are. And I'm excited to say that even though we are recording this right at the eve of Adam's Kickstarter finishing, you guys know that you can still head over to the Nightlight Kickstarter. You can still claim rewards. You can still support Adam and the channel and the school by supporting their goal to get just one more contributor than they got last year. The campaign is over, but you can still claim those rewards. So make sure that you head over there. The link is pinned in the comments and probably in the description of this video, so you can check that out. But today we are gathered here to do Capricorn season. It's Justice, and I'm actually really excited and proud to say that we have a special guest star joining us. Whitney and I, taking on the Sisyphean task of discussing Saturn, Mars, the Moon, and Jupiter in Capricorn. We were excited about that, but not too excited to enlist help from a qualified adult in the room. We wanted to talk. So I'm really proud and excited to introduce my dear friend, fellow Nightlight alum and astrologer, Sarah Posh. Sarah's with me here. Hello.
Hello, resident Capricorn in the house.
Yeah, so at the start of all of the Dignities episodes, we always talk about what Capricorn credentials we have. To this week we're talking Capricorn. So I'll kick us off. I'm a Cap rising. I've got Uranus, Neptune, my North Node, and my ascendant all together in beautiful little Capricorn, and my Saturn is in Aquarius. So that's what we're rolling with over here, Sarah.
I've got Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, my IC, and my Sun all in Capricorn.
Sexy.
See, and this
What?
is why I'm glad I'm doing this with you two because you have all the Capricorn cred. I have very little. You see, I just have Neptune, good old Neptune in Cap. But my Saturn is in Sagittarius. So, you know,
Yeah, and you have Saturn and Mars together, and we're going to get into this, but Saturn and Mars co-rule Capricorn. So, you got
they
some stuff going
certainly
on. You
do.
got yeah.
There's some synergy there, whether I like it or
Yeah.
not.
So every month when we talk about dignities, we talk a little bit about the philosophical underpinnings of the dignity scheme because it's pretty easy to find yourself on an essential dignity calculator looking at points or frankly lost in what it means that a planet has dignity or debility somewhere. And really, our usual co-host, Alex Amorosi, has a fabulous analogy that I am going to ham-fistedly paraphrase here for you today, which is he talks about a planet in its environment being a little bit like a tourist. And if a planet is in dignity, it is a really educated tourist. It's in a context that it feels familiar with. It's in a place it understands the language of and how to work the maps. And when a planet is out of dignity, that's when we see a planet that is called debility. Sometimes it's called detriment, fall, exile, whatever words you want to use. It's kind of like being a tourist in a place you don't know the language of, you don't have the context of, and you don't necessarily have access to your usual tools. And it doesn't mean that you are destined for a life of being on the outside of that culture or a life of not understanding or doomed, which is something that we repeat every single month. And I'm going to repeat again now. You are not doomed if you have a planet in detriment or fall, but it does mean that you have to work a little harder and you have to try to figure out that context. And there are going to be patterns probably that you're going to have to disrupt. But that's kind of the blanket introduction that we give every month when we talk about dignities. And that's where we're starting. And today we're going to start with Saturn because Saturn is the planetary ruler of Capricorn. Capricorn is an earthy, feminine cardinal sign. And Saturn, in some ways, is kind of like a big, I think we'll get into this, but people think of Saturn as sort of like a patriarchal figure in some ways that rules Capricorn and that Capricorn is all about work. I think what I commonly see associated with Capricorn are figures like Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, like this sort of like Wall Street banker type, or maybe an iconic presidential archetype would be something that people associate Capricorn pretty heavily with work. What do you think? What kind of archetypes do you associate with Saturn in Capricorn?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up the sort of banker Wall Street archetype. I think that really is fitting for Saturn in Capricorn, knowing that that archetype is very much what we think of as the traditional mode of work, right? At least here in the US, right? Working 9 to 5 or probably 9 to 9, dedicated, persistent, determined, really having a full and complete understanding of what it is you are bringing forth and why, right? It's like this level of Saturn in Capricorn presents this level of competence that, quite frankly, you just don't see in a lot of other signs in this way, right? I mean, you guys
Yeah.
both know with your Capricorn cred over there, and I'm talking to two really incredibly competent astrologers, right? And this is really a measure of that level of skill, but it's also about like that competence, that level of skill doesn't come without dedication. And I think that that's where Saturn in Capricorn really, really makes its magic as the ruler here is the dedication, determination, and persistence to really like go the distance.
Mm.
What do you think, Sarah?
I actually feel with the feminine Saturn, it's the grandmother crone
Mm,
archetype that I really, really feel with that. And that also brings in the element of time and the relationship or the polarity with Cancer and the moon, and how I feel like this Earth, this cardinal Earth sign ruled by Saturn, is here to experience and, develop the wisdom of experience over time and this building of something that has lasting value and the dedication, but the dedication in real human relationship and experience. So I think there is like the feminine wisdom that comes from the Saturn in Cap. There's more connective quality, I feel, than the Saturn in Aquarius. That's more the intellectual side. Yeah.
ooh. Can I interject real quick?
Yes.
I just want to say I love that because something I love about your practice, Sarah, I've heard it come out of your mouth so many times, is the idea of grandmother medicine, right? It's like so deeply caring, but also a little bit of tough love at the same time. And I think that is a Saturn lesson in its essence, right? Is that sort of grandmother medicine.
Right. She's been through a many cycles of time, the wheel of fortune, the wheel of karma, and she knows she has the discernment of age and time and life to know that she might be listening to you and making some soup for you and keeping you warm or letting cry on her shoulder, and then she kind of gives you the little, all right, it's time to get up. You got to
Pull up
keep
your
going.
bootstraps, baby.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I feel like a really interesting reference point for this that we will revisit when we get to talking about the moon, but is the mother figure in particular in Crazy Rich Asians, the main male protagonist's mother figure who is so exacting in quite a Capricornian way. And there's actually a pretty rich debate. I just want to note here ongoing, although, it's specialized and there's only a few astrologers kind of talking about it, but I think Diana Rose Harper has some work on the astrology podcast specifically talking about Saturn as a feminine archetype, which is something that has always made more sense to me because of how matchy-matchy the Hellenistic system is, right? We have one benefic, one malefic in the greater category, one benefic, one malefic in the lesser category. We have one masculine, one feminine, one mas. It's so matchy-matchy, and it doesn't make any sense to me that there's one planet that's considered feminine, and it's Venus and Venus and the moon. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that that's pretty interesting to think about and to go down. But when I think about Saturn in Capricorn in terms of competency, that is so interesting. Signs ruled by malefics, thinking about dignified malefics, that is something that the traditional texts are also quite torn about. They say that can either make a malefic better or worse. And I think that's something that frustrates a lot of students of astrology and certainly a lot of people who are researching their own chart because it's like, what do you mean it could either make it better or worse? Is it better or worse? I just want to know if it's better or worse in my chart. If that's you, I want to encourage you to think and feel intuitively into what Saturn does in your life because I think that most people have a lot more knowledge in their body and in their gut than they give themselves credit for when it comes to dignity. It's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and to be convinced that you have an evil Saturn. Um, we always talk about that on the show and encourage you guys to reach out to us, and people do. So please always feel free to do that. But competency is a little bit of a curse. And I want to bring that up because Capricorn has an effortless looking competency. But when we think about the rulerships of Capricorn as Saturn and Mars, it is a hard won competency. It is earned deeply through agony, stress, uphill battle. I said the word Sisyphean earlier. Certainly that Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill for all of eternity. So when people look at Capricorns and it's feedback I've gotten my whole life is you talk like you always think you're right. Or you talk like you're acting like you know. It's like that's a disposition towards the world that I don't totally have control over. That was built on a foundation of having to always know, maybe being parentified or whatever it may be. I think the parentified daughter is also a really good Capricorn archetype. But I wonder what you guys have to say about that. Some of the more positive or more challenging ways that a Saturn in Capricorn might present.
Yeah, that shit is not effortless. If you know a Capricorn well, you know that it may look that way, but ooh, it is not effortless. And like it shouldn't be, right? This is a climb up the mountain here, right? Adam speaks of Capricorn, specifically the Capricorn Cancer dynamic, in a way that I love. He talks about Capricorn as the gateway to the gods, in opposed to Cancer, the gateway to mankind. Well, if Capricorn is the gateway to the gods, that should be hard to attain, right? The climb toward the heavens is not an easy one. And at the same time, like lifting weighty things while doing it, that's why Saturn can so often feel like, even in Capricorn, a punishment, right? Because you are Sisyphus carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. That's Atlas, but we'll just mix our metaphors here. And, right, if you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, like, yeah, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a struggle. Saturn innately presents hard work, limitations, difficulty, right? When Saturn is in its dignity, it still presents all of those things, right? But the fact is that Saturn is about the long game. And so that's why I love that Saturn in Capricorn plays that long game really well. They have the stamina to lift that weight and go far, right? Saturn is well, in ancient times, right? Saturn was the furthest planet in the solar system, right? It is hard to get to. And so there is this sense of really strenuous effort it takes to learn those lessons, to go the distance, right? To get that growth and evolution. And that's why we call Saturn the Lord of Karma, you know?
Yeah, I want to say quickly that I think Atlas is actually a really good touch point for Saturn in Aquarius because
Mm,
it's like a seemingly thankless task, but that has like a deep, demonstrable purpose and meaning and significance. I really think of Capricorn as like an absolutely thankless task, literally pushing the rock up the hill because that's your punishment. That's what you're doing. You're just pushing a rock up a hill. You're not shouldering the world's burdens, which is like actually kind of a noble task. I don't
right.
know. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, as a Saturn and Cap native, I can say that post Saturn return, Saturn becomes a lot more relationally constructive. Think about being born naturally good at Saturn. That's not honestly something that's fun as a kid to know this competency of responsibility and effort and ambition. And it's very rare, I think, that we are raised in a way that that's not conditioned to be externally motivated and validated. And so reclaiming that Saturn for the integrity of my own self-reference post Saturn return so that the competency is applied or the effort, all of that ambition and, relentless, relentless need to just continue to push and effort and work. Um, it's definitely got better with time. So I think the competency thing, you kind of get this integrity and this reclamation for yourself with Saturn and Capricorn to say, "Oh, this is my Saturn. I'm not doing this Saturn for everybody just because I can, just because you know that I am capable." And I also think the competency thing in a lived experience can be really frustrating because people doubt the amount of effort you're putting into something because you make it look easy,
Hmm.
or they like can diminish the value of something because they just assume, oh, I could do that. Anybody could do that, like if you make it look easy, a Cap rising or Saturn and Cap. It's like,
Yeah, there's like a saying that's like check on your strong friends. And I'm like, so they're saying check on your Capricorn risings, like
Yeah.
your Capricorns. That's what they're saying. And I think about that in my life. Like this is a little personal, but I remember the first time my mom ever said she was proud of me in my life was like 6 months ago. And she was like, "You're doing such a good job raising your child. I'm so proud of you." And she probably just saw that I looked straight up shocked. And she was like, "Well, I don't want to say I'm proud of you. That makes it seem like I didn't expect you to do a good job, and we all knew you were going to do a good job at this anyway." Like that's the
mm,
curse of the competency is like,
yeah.
"Well, I don't really want to reward you for all this. That's what we all expected of you anyway."
But that's supposed to be a compliment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think Sarah's bringing up a really good point about Saturn and Capricorn that we need to acknowledge, and Saturn generally, which is that Saturn is not just Lord of Karma, yes, Whitney, but also relating to time and elderly people and things that stand the test of time and classic things. Saturn is not a young person's game. And when I see clients or friends or people who book with me, they were born in 2002, and they're asking me, when will blank happen to me? It's like when you're 40, strap in a couple decades, like if you're listening to this and you're a young person with a heavy Saturn, Saturn is hard when you're young, period. There's just no way around it. And a huge part of it is that Saturn eases once you have a body of work to show for what you've done. Think about something like you mentioned integrity, Sarah. You need to have a body of work to have integrity, for other people to see your integrity. And when you're a young person with Saturn, there's a real impatience in your heart and in your body and in your bones to say, but I have integrity, but I know that I'm telling the truth, but I know that I can prove this, but I know that I'm competent. You just don't have a body of work for people to see that yet. And it's something that takes time to develop, and it should. And it really eases up. In a talk I saw from Austin Koppig at NORWAC a couple years ago, he was talking about how in the Vedic tradition, Saturn is said to have a maturing age of 35. And that's a little later than the first Saturn return. It's almost closer to this first Saturn square. And I feel like that's really been true for me in my client practice. Clients with heavy Saturn can almost point to year 35 and say, yes, that's exactly where it got easier for me. And that's where Saturn became a friend that I get to laugh with rather than the sort of administrator.
Taskmaster.
Yeah, administrator.
And yet, isn't that about the age we begin our Saturn square, right? I would
Right.
know because I am this close to completing mine. Oh. Right? And
Yeah.
that is, I mean, time is, you talk about so many important things here because time has been correlated with Saturn since ancient times, right? Saturn is Kronos, the god of time. I love that fun fact, folks we say folks with strong Saturn often age backwards or age like fine wine, which, having a sun ruled by Saturn, I kind of like that. I'm like, oh, it gives me hope,
You're
right?
like,
Like,
better be.
yeah,
Mhm.
it only gets better from here. But you talk about a couple of other things that really excite me and drive home that Saturn in Cap feeling. You mentioned both the idea of body of work, that the body of work that you create takes time to make, right? And also integrity, and the fact that integrity, Alexandra, you told me this one day when I was having a hard time trying to figure out how to be an astrology podcaster, right? Like, what does integrity mean? Well, you told me integrity means showing up when people expect you to show up. And you just keep showing up, right? And showing up is putting in the work, right? That is that consistency on a measured basis is such a strong and important Capricorn signature that I'm so thankful for my Capricorn friends to be able to help, impart those lessons of wisdom, right? Saturn and Cap people in general, because of that Saturn. I'll say Aquarius too, are wise beyond their years, right?
Yeah, I think this is a good point to bring up Mars, which I'll do. And then, Sarah, I'd love to hear from you because we talk about impatience and drive. Those are two words that have come up in the last, 2 minutes, right? The impatience is such a thrumming war drum, Mars heartbeat in Capricorn, especially for young Capricorns. It's like, I have to accomplish blank. I'm already 13 and I haven't written a manifesto. I'm failing. I'm failing at my life, right? Like, I'm not a millionaire and I'm 22. I'm failing. There's such an impatience. And Mars in Capricorn is such a strategist and is such a brute force. Mars and Saturn together have a brute force about them that I think is part of where the Capricorn competency archetype comes from. But I also think it's interesting because it really equips Capricorn with a kind of an unfair tool. And here's how. It's kind of like training through your entire life with a weight vest. And so you just have this inbuilt assumption that you will be able to brute force your way through things. As we know, many things in life are not things you want to brute force your way through. What do you think
Yeah,
about Mars and Cap?
I love that. I was thinking what did you say? You said it's kind of an unfair advantage. Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's sort of
Yeah.
like an unfair tool, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I think you get the cold, dry, and then also the cardinal energy of Capricorn. And you match that with the forward momentum, the ambition, the drive of the Mars, and the ability to have that Mars that can remain embodied and pragmatic with that Earth, right? So it's not the Aries rushing with our head, it's embodied, and the patience, the essence of time that Saturn brings in and helps Mars to actually follow through and endure and persevere, but also not get stuck. The ability to pivot, the ability to have that initiating quality to make the turn if you need to make the turn while you're walking up the mountain or doing the climb. But there's that unrelenting part of the repetition and the consistency and the discipline that Saturn gives to Mars, and Mars brings to that Capricorn summit, I should say. Whitney, what do you think?
Yes, the Capricorn summit. I mean, okay, and you say the turning and the turning up the mountain, and all I can see is the turning of the wheel and how Capricorn marks a cross-quarter holiday, right? The winter solstice, just like all cardinal signs do. But the fact that Capricorn is here at the darkest of the dark to see just the littlest, smallest pinprick of light, the return of the light, right? That's kind of like Mars. Without the drive of Mars, the dedication of Mars, the we could say craving of honor and glory of Mars to find the light, to bring back the light, right? That's kind of how I see Mars playing into Capricorn as its exaltation, right? But it's interesting because, like, I think, Alexandra, you mentioned strategy, right? And I totally see that. But another way I see that is thrift. Like, there's a way in which Mars in Capricorn is incredibly thrifty, or at least in a way of like cutting away the extraneous things, the things that you don't need, right? Because we're on a mission for success. We're on a mission to bring the light back. We're on a mission to achieve. And we're going to have to drop that weight pack, right? If we're going to have
Mm-hmm.
to drop the things that we don't necessarily need, maybe the creature comforts, right? Which might be, a reason why the moon is in its detriment here, right? Because the moon loves her creature comforts, but Mars is like, we don't need that heated blanket. We are going to do this all on our own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something to be said. So we mentioned that Mars rules Capricorn via exaltation. So Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Saturn is in domicile. And just to revisit the nature of that, the domicile rulership is consistent. It is, it's like a thrumming. It happens every day and kind of in the same way. And the exaltation rulership is a little more situational. It's a little more circumstantial, and it has these peaks and valleys to it. I think there's something really interesting about this concept. You said strategy and thrift. That's hunger, baby. That's craving. You said the word craving too. And my one of my main reference points for Capricorn always is Black Phillip from the movie The Witch by Robert Eggers. And Black Phillip is a goat that is all black and represents Lucifer. So we can see all the ways that it is very perfect for Capricorn archetype. But his question that he asks when he wants to bestow his gift is, would you like to live deliciously? That's the question you answer yes or no to, which feels very on point for the co-rulership of the malefics, right? I think it's pretty interesting that Capricorn is obviously the only sign that is co-ruled by malefics. And I remember having a astrology client ask me once, she goes, "You're a Capricorn rising. Is it true what they say about Capricorns?" And I was like, "Probably. What do they say about Capricorns, girl?" And she said that their whole life is just really hard and it's never ending struggle after struggle. I was like, is that what people are saying
Rude.
about Capricorn?
Wow.
But also, yeah, I guess, kinda.
I
But
mean,
that's part
hey,
of why Saturn ages with fine wine, because you either harden and become more and more isolated and cynical with time and hard experience, or you start to develop the nature of joy through wisdom of like, it's lighthearted. Yeah, shit happens, it's life is hard and you lighten from that.
Yeah, I personally have never met a Capricorn who didn't have that ability to laugh at hardship and a sort of optimism and generally um that sort of demeanor around struggle and challenge. You guys let me know in the comments. Do you know any horribly cynical, locked in it Capricorns? I just feel like I've never really met anyone like that who has Capricorn. I feel like people you have to make peace with it. It would drive you mad. That's something I think is explored interestingly by Liz Green in her book Saturn, which is an excellent book we often recommend on this channel when we talk about the dignities. But she talks specifically about Saturn in Capricorn and Capricorn generally as being quite a double-bodied sign, which double-bodied is usually how we talk about the mutable signs. But Capricorn is represented by the glyph of the sea goat, which is actually not a real creature. It's two creatures smashed together in a mythological way. And Capricorn is also represented by two or more, depending on how you view it, but distinct glyphs. And no other sign really has that. And also, co-ruled by malefics.
Mhm.
So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's, one thing while we're talking about Saturn once again and Liz Green, I pulled a quote. I did go back to my trusty little Saturn. There it is, pages marked and all. But I love the way Liz Green says that Saturn is the instrument of opportunity through which the person comes to understand the nature of his free will. And
Mm.
of course, that talks about Saturn, right? But I think that talks about Capricorn as a whole. And I think we get something of Mars in there too, right? Even though this sign is ruled by both malefics, it's like through the cracking open, right? Mars creates the crack if Saturn is the rocks, right? We break rocks in this place, right? It's funny because I think you both know that my husband has both Saturn and Mars in Capricorn, and he spent a full decade plus of his career and his education in construction. And I think that is also such an interesting and great archetypal application for the way these dignities, Saturn and Mars, represent in Capricorn, right? Because, like, tying that back to the whole free will thing, like, what Capricorn is doing is not like transmuting something like a Virgo or a Pisces might. Capricorn is literally creating matter from nothing. You know what I mean? Whether that is like the busting up of rocks and the rebuilding, or it's simply the building through effort and sustained effort to create. I feel like Capricorn doesn't get the credit it's due for its creativity, but Capricorn is such a creative place. I mean, it's a sign that marks the solstice. How couldn't it be?
Yeah, Capricorns, in fact, I think a a Capricorn without a creative outlet is repressed, definitionally. I'll
Right.
say it.
I was just gonna say it's so interesting that you brought up construction because I have the Capricorn stellium in my fourth house with the sun, and my brother has Jupiter and the moon in Capricorn, and my father built his own construction company. He framed homes for a living, started his own company, and my brother inherited the company. And so that's like I could do a whole episode on dignities just by picking apart my brother's experience of that versus
Versus
mine.
Yes.
Yes.
That's so
Oh,
interesting. Okay,
chills.
well, we're going to have to talk about it as we transition to the moon and Jupiter in Capricorn then.
Yeah, I think this is a good spot to transition to the moon because when we talk about construction, like that's a pretty good entry point. Because when you think about what you want, the ideal conditions for a construction site and for a project is replicability. You want the consistency on a daily basis of the conditions of the weather and of the building and of the staff. Like the last thing you need to be successful in your construction project is unexpected circumstances, weather changes, fluctuations. All of that stuff is sort of under the broad purview of the moon. And I think more broadly to your point, Whitney, about fate and free will and circumstance, Saturn, Lord of Karma, I deeply associate Saturn transits particularly with free will. When I see a client and they have a big Saturn transit, it's almost like what I can tell you is the choice that you'll be presented with. And I can't tell you what you're going to do with that because that's actually up to you in a Saturn transit, I really believe. Um, Saturn is oppositional in the dignity scheme to the sun and the moon, and the sun and the moon historically, philosophically, were associated with fate and fortune, both. And so when we think about Saturn being opposed to fate and fortune, it's almost like this is where free will comes into play versus the moon and the sun are bringing you changing circumstances of fate or maybe situational stuff, fortune like the moon, and bringing those things that may feel a little bit outside of your control. What do you guys think about the moon and Capricorn, Whitney?
Yeah, the moon in Capricorn is So interesting because of exactly what you're talking about, this flux between fate and fortune, fate and free will, right? And Capricorn wants to make things permanent and, like you said, replicable, right? But the moon is always in flux, right? She is always zipping around the earth just fast as can be, weaving all of the other planets together. And so, with the moon in Capricorn, you're presented with this challenge of the need or drive for consistency, yet continuing to move with the fluctuations, right? That the moon always brings. Something I love about a moon in Capricorn is sort of this like cause driven or service driven ability, right? For Capricorn, for a moon in Capricorn, like work is the creative act. You know, it goes back to the creative bit that we were mentioning earlier. And because of this, you know, the moon being the great mother, a moon in Cap is like provider energy, mama bear type of like, we're going to work for it. We're going to make sure we're safe. I'm going to give you every little thing you need. Don't you worry. Right. And so I think those are some of the loveliest things about the moon, when really, because we know that just because the moon is in detriment here doesn't mean that somebody with a Capricorn moon is doomed. We'll say it again and again, right? There are so many redeeming things. What do you think, Sarah?
My heart aches for Capricorn moon because I think about the co-rulership of Saturn and of Mars. I think about, we've talked about the gifts of developing that self-reliance, of the competency, and also the shadow of that innate and born competency. And I think with the detriment, this consistent assumption of self-reliance and competency and the development of their capacity, their emotional intelligence through hardship, right? And they don't, we just assume they don't need our help. They don't need a hug. They don't want one. And there's this, it feels like there's this Saturnian wall and between them and that lunar need for connection and cohesion and coming together. And so it can feel like a detriment to be so capable to be able to take care of yourself. And how that was developed is usually from a debilitated circumstance, you know? So I know the Capricorn moon people in my life are just some of the most amazing people to have on your side. Like you said, the caregiver quality, and the construction and the responsibility and the care, the deep, deep care. And I also know there's a love language of, on one hand, making sure that they know they don't have to do it alone. They're not alone. And giving them space and time alone is also a way to give them love, to not need anything from them, essentially, because everybody's always needing something from them.
Yeah, if you're a Capricorn moon, go ahead and tell us in the comments if your love language is acts of service, because probably.
Because
Um,
probably.
yeah, I think this is where we come back to the Crazy Rich Asians. Michelle Yeoh's character, her name escapes me right now, but the actress Michelle Yeoh, she plays this very, very expectant. She has high expectations and high standards mother figure. And I feel like that is so common for people with a Capricorn moon. When we think about the moon in Cancer, we think about nurture, and that's a word that comes up a lot. I think the moon in Cancer has the ability to foster growth and create conditions for growth, but it is not a nurturing moon necessarily. When we think about the moon glyph, even the moon glyph has two sharp points to it. It kind of looks like a blade in some ways, right? And I think that that's kind of what Capricorn moons are getting at some points. I think about when we used to do our month ahead overviews with Adam. Those were the days. And he would always joke and say, keep astrology goth. And that's such a Capricorn moon thing to say. Um, it's so grounded and it's so real about the challenges of life and the obstacles. It's bringing me also back to the construction site analogy. And I think about buildings that are inflexible, that are built in locations where they need to have sway, especially skyscrapers, right? Skyscrapers need to be able to withstand a breeze and they need to kind of be able to sway. And we know that there are skyscrapers where the designers and the architects and the engineers have failed at this task, and cracks start to appear in the facade and the buildings have no give. That is that's the rigidity that can sometimes be a pattern that Capricorn moons have to break, that I think is related back to what you said, Sarah, about a relational capacity, relying on others, knowing, quite honestly, that they're going to disappoint you.
Mm.
Knowing that whatever you've asked somebody else to do is it's not going to happen to your standard. You could have done it better. That's it. That's the pain. That is like the pain that like Capricorn moons need to liberate themselves from and find a way to deal with.
Exactly. Oh my gosh,
Exactly.
that's the point. Yes, that is the point of liberation, right? Because you may want to or feel like you can do it all yourself, but at a certain point, that is not healthy for anyone or everyone, right? It's the whole like teach a man to fish type of a thing. And so there's this way that like a Capricorn moon can have these expectations, right? Like these grand expectations of what should happen, what should be. And it can be so painful when those aren't met. And it can be so hard to give up control, right? Control of the situation to somebody else when you know it might not get done quite as well as you've done it, right? And it makes me think about something Adam teaches in year one, year two, right? Is the fact that without even thinking about the sign itself, we always go back to the planetary dignity. So I think about when I'm thinking about the moon in Capricorn, I'm thinking about the moon and Saturn together, or I'm thinking about the moon and Mars together. And Sarah, you were alluding to this too, right? Well, the moon and Saturn together, I mean, that is like such a signature of worry, right? It's like carrying the emotional weight, the emotional baggage of things that I think can be really, really hard for people with a Capricorn moon. When I think of the moon and Mars together, that shit's painful, right? And so there's this way, though, that astrology is such a gift because when we understand these things and we also know that the moon fluxes all of the time, that life won't always be full of worry. Life won't always be full of pain. And that is the Saturnian growth process through it all.
Yeah, I remember in year one of Adam's lecture on the Saturn and the moon and the dignity scheme. That piece about the changing and the flux and the correlation of the moon being so attuned to that Saturnian wisdom of death and decay and life's ever going process of changing. And I just, again, the ache came in. I knew my Capricorn moons and this predisposition towards the pessimism or the cynical, the worry comes from this just deep, deep knowing that it exists and it will continue to turn, the wheel will continue to turn, and almost just never getting their hopes up too much, never letting in too much space for things to get too good. I also was wanting to go back to something that was said about um, doing it better than anybody, everybody else, and feeling that disappointment, but also the coming back to when they do have help or somebody does start to help them or provide some sort of resourcing, and then they get that feeling as the result comes through, and they end up having to help that person helping them on, like, teaching them almost how to do it better, and they think, oh, I should have just done it on my own. Like, they come back to that state of, it would have been easier if I would have just done it myself, if I would have just stayed in a state of self-reliance to the point of potential disconnection or isolation or loneliness.
Yeah, I had a coworker once whose wife was a Capricorn stellium, and he said being with a Capricorn is a little bit like having a middle manager who is constantly disappointed in you, giving you a performance review every day.
Hi,
Is
it's
that how you feel,
me.
Wit?
I relate.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's brutal. I think there's something here too in what you're saying, Sarah, around um I'm going to tease this out kind of in real time, but if you're unwilling to let any of that work go, there's a cost of burnout, which is a major Saturn signature. Like if you've ever experienced burnout in your life, go back, look at those transits. I guarantee there was a Saturn transit going on because Saturn lessons that are failed, I use that term pretty lightly, but that are failed often result in a pretty extreme burnout. And it's a lot of this work that we can't get off our plates because of the competency curse. It's like, I should just do it. I should just do it. It's the brute force. It's Mars and Saturn together talking to us. But there's also, I think, a real limiting belief. And this is where we get into Jupiter in detriment in Capricorn. Jupiter is in fall in Capricorn. So again, it's not like the moon where it shows up the same in Capricorn every day. The moon doesn't show up the same every day, but you get it. It's circumstantial. It's very situational. But Jupiter in Capricorn, I think, talks a little bit about and shows us this limiting belief that a lot of Jupiter and Capricorn people have, or even Capricorn people deal with and break out of, which is like life always has to be hard. There's no space for rest or beauty or love or light. It's like, oh, I have breath, I have energy today. Let me invent a task to do with my energy. What kind of hard stuff can I accomplish with this energy? And I feel like that's a real limiting belief. Gay Hendricks talks about this and the concept of the big leap, where you're on the precipice of something incredible happening to you and your whole life falls apart, or you get really sick because you just have this inbuilt limitation. And this, I think, is a good place to kick us off for Jupiter in Capricorn, because Jupiter in Capricorn is, to be honest, I don't have to be honest with Jupiter and Capricorn people. You know what I'm going to say. This is one of the harder dignities to work with in my practice and my experience. A lot of dignity and all states of dignity can be worked with and can be gifts and superpowers. But Jupiter in Capricorn has a sort of, here's a phrase I used earlier today, a dispositional skepticism, just an inbuilt sense that things are possibly not going to work out. And that's something that I feel like Jupiter and Capricorn people can't easily shake and have to actually kind of work at. Whitney, I wonder what you're thinking about Jupiter and Cap.
Well, I think, that's really interesting, right? Because we're talking about both the greater benefic and the greater malefic here, basically working at odds, which is the truth, right? Their jobs are different jobs. So you put them together, right? Saturn and Jupiter as this sort of like creative, destructive force all at the same time. And it almost creates this like undoing or even like a self-sabotaging aspect sometimes, right? Because like think about Jupiter. Jupiter is the great philosopher. Jupiter has all of these profound ideas and big beliefs, right? Big ideas. Well, and Saturn wants to create them, but there are too many. There are too many, right? One of the things why Mars works so well in Capricorn is because Mars has a focus. Mars has a singular focus, right? So when I think about Jupiter and the tendency to do everything, do all the things, right? I think that's where the sort of crux of this Jupiter and fall in Capricorn dynamic comes in to play.
Yeah, that this is so interesting. I love talking about Jupiter and Capricorn in this dignity. I also think falls as a dignity by nature have a quality of extremes.
Hmm.
And so there's also thinking about a Jupiterian quality taken to the extreme in a Saturnian or martial direction
Hmm.
of the Capricorn, rulers is the word disappointment,
Yeah.
dissatisfaction, the upper limiting. I think the relationship to success and failure with Jupiter and Capricorn can be at times extreme. Actually, maybe it's an extreme fear of success or an extreme fear of failure, but you're driven by that extreme internally. And yeah, the fall of the Jupiter, the fall of the faith, the fall of the belief, the just feeling Saturn, that like a dark cloud always hovering over you. Um, Again, I got the ache for the Jupiter and Caps.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of how we had to talk directly at and to Scorpio moons in the Scorpio dignities
Mm-hmm.
episode. Because the reality is that if you have Jupiter in Capricorn, you know what we're talking about. You feel probably unlucky. You do feel that felt sense in your life of what if all of this is taken from me? Or what if this doesn't work out? What if I jump and there is no net and I die? I mean, those are the real stakes. And to your point, Whitney, of the planets accomplishing different things, Capricorn is the dead of winter. It's our hungriest time as human beings in the wheel of the year. And Jupiter wants to feast like a king. It's a hunger for resources that just straight up do not exist at certain points in your life. And that I think is what brings about that sort of disappointment that Sarah's talking about. I think there's also a warping effect that can happen with Jupiter and Capricorn. And I wish I could be more specific about that, but that's just a word that always comes up for me. And when we think about Jupiter's natural significations as the taking its joy in the 11th house of hope and optimism and connection to daimon, which is like spirit, and having breath in our lungs in the 11th house, if that factor is warping, there's just a real like wavy quality, almost like the waves of heat coming off asphalt, where you're just not able to see things clearly um, in your life. And usually it has a sort of pessimistic bent to it.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about it that way, and I really like that like creative visual you painted of the warping. And when you bring in the joys, it makes so much sense because I think about that example reversed, right? The 12th house as the joy of Saturn. Well, you put Jupiter in the 12th house, and then isn't it so hard to see? It's so hard to find the gifts. It's so hard to find the beliefs. It's so hard to find the optimism, right? And so I really see I see what you mean with that warping. I really like that.
I am thinking about the generation that's born with Jupiter and Capricorn in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s, and they have a lot of them have Mars and Saturn in Scorpio, like dignified, essentially malefics. And I have examples of people who have created extreme levels of Capricornian success, but to the detriment of, like, we coming back to burnout, to the detriment of the moon, to the detriment of their body, to the detriment of
Their
connection.
vision, their
There's,
values, their hope,
yes,
their optimism.
yes,
Yeah.
that overly cold, dry expansion is like this Jupiterian fall of fullness that's really deeply, deeply empty on the inside.
Yeah, that's rough. A lot of people born at that time period also have Pluto in the mix,
Yeah, it's right on that cusp. Yeah.
which is just that's another story. That's another pod, you guys. But um yeah, there's a real sense of skepticism towards institutions, and I don't mean cultural institutions. I mean any capital letter you can assign to anything. Love, humanity. There's a skepticism towards that stuff and a sense of pre pre-built in disappointment that often begins with what people believe is optimism. They're like, I got excited about something and look, it didn't work out.
Mm.
Now, this, as with all the others, we will always say at least 4 times per episode, at least once for every planet, that dignity and debility is not a curse. You're not doomed. You're not doomed to be a pessimist forever. And there are lots of successful and incredible people who have planets in all states of dignity and debility. And usually, when you're looking at your chart, you're missing some. So definitely enlist an astrologer friend to help you see the secret dignity or debility. Whitney's given me some, Sarah's given me some in my own chart. But I think that some of the patterns for Jupiter and Capricorn can reveal themselves in moments of abundance. And that's where you might dig through your past and take a look at that. Because, I have clients who, for example, have a lot of money at one point, but they're haunted by the hunger of maybe their youth or like a poverty or scarcity mindset.
Mm.
And so they spend every day of, let's say, 10 years of wealth and counting, thinking to themselves, well, I could lose all of this in a minute. Or what if I don't have as much money as I thought I did? That kind of rumination, which is something we've assigned to Saturn and Capricorn as well, is something where I think that that can be a little part of the pattern that breaks. And then the disappointment, we can't, you can't prevent yourself from things, circumstances out of your control that are going to disappoint you, but you can develop rhetorical devices or even therapeutic ones, somatic ones to like regulate yourself against that feeling. For example, I have a dignified moon in Cancer. My moon in Cancer like really doesn't like being surprised in any way. And it's like a joke that I have with Whitney and Sarah where, Sarah will be like, "Should we do this?" And my first response is literally like, "Ew. Why would we do that?
I didn't
That's not what
plan
I was
that.
expecting."
No.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting you to say that. And then I know this about myself. So I say always, I'll say something like, "That's probably a good idea. This is my first response. Please give me a couple days. I will love this idea. Right now I don't love it. I will like this idea and I will be excited about it." And then we do whatever it is and it's really fun. But there are ways that we can build in what would that be? It would be like a bypass measure for our reflexes astrologically.
Oh, don't I know? My Saturn ruled sun, in its detriment, mind you, has a very, very similar experience so often. And it's funny because I'll get, like requests to work together on a podcast or something. And I'm like, wait. Wait, you want to do this when? This week? Absolutely not. I need all the time to play. It's like there's this Saturn thing that requires structure, right? And so like just going back to the Jupiter piece of it all, right? Where Jupiter's like, let's bust out of this structure, right? That creates that dynamic of tension. But as you were getting to Alexander, there's so many ways to work with this combination, right? And it is, I'm going to let Sarah say her own words, but I feel like it can be going back to that grandmother medicine aspect, right? The seeing the positives within Saturn, but then also measuring them, right? Bringing them back down to Earth sometimes, right? Jupiter is just this lofty planet who wants to just expand and be buoyant. And sometimes we need to bring that balloon back down to Earth with actual systems that we structure our life around to create the ideal amount of work or the ideal amount of money or the ideal amount of something. Leave it to the Virgo moon here to be creating structures and habits around the practical things that we need to manage with this placement.
Yes, what's coming to me is also thinking about the polarity of exaltation ruler Mars, and we were talking about that craving, that
Mm-hmm.
yearning, that hunger. And I'm just imagining when we think about Jupiter and its fall here and this belief concept, this yearning, this hunger for belief. It's almost like the hunger for Jupiter feels out of reach for the positive expression of that Jupiter. But I see a lot of that in Jupiter and Capricorn natives is it's like it feels unreachable, but they're the yearning, the awareness of wanting to touch it, wanting to have it and hold it is so there. And the other thing that was coming to me was thinking about like the struggles of some of our placements in natal context, that's the reality and remediation. And I think for these Capricorn placements, it's so important and it can be so helpful to come back to the body, which comes back to the grandmother medicine of don't forget to also get the blanket and the soup and the hug before you get the advice and the pat on the back to get up and keep going. So coming back to the body, coming back to that Cancer polarity of the Capricorn, even just simple, the way that you really sit with and enjoy the food that you're eating or buying food that brings you some sort of pleasure and comfort, not just gets you through the day.
Nah, get me through the day. I'm eating at my desk. I got shit to do.
Not just the
Unless
protein.
it's a muffin, a gluten-free Trader Joe's muffin.
Gluten-free Trader Joe's muffin. Only if somebody bought it for me. I'm not going to Trader Joe's. It's too far out of the way. I'm going to eat whatever's in my fridge at my desk. That's how it's going to go. I think to your point, Sarah, and then I'll close this out, but I want to wrap up as well by saying that Jupiter and Saturn are contrasting planets, but they're also sister planets is kind of what we call that, right? They're complementary in the way that a yin yang symbol is. There's a little bit of one in the other. And I think about that book, Think and Grow Rich, and so many books about success, specifically business success, which is a Capricornian type of success that we talked about at the very beginning, are about getting your belief right and about getting your mindset right. And so there's a lot more synastry to Saturn and Jupiter than I think most people recognize immediately, just because it's easy to say Jupiter wants to say yes and Saturn wants to say no. Saturn also definitely wants to say yes to you. If Saturn is saying no to you, I almost always feel like you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. Something I've been thinking of recently is the concept of collecting no's, which is sort of like a meme way of saying putting yourself out there, right? The concept that people say is, I want to collect 5 no's a day or however many no's a year. And the idea is you're just going to ask for things and you're going to assume probably that people are going to say no to you. But the reality that most people find is that a shocking amount of yeses come out of asking for things that they want. And I saw a video recently on TikTok where a girl's goal was to collect 1,000 no's in a year. She started reading through the list. It was like 500 before she got to a no. Everything she asked for, she ended up getting. So I think that Saturn and Jupiter actually do have a lot more synastry and power to work together than it is immediately necessarily scrutable to us when we're looking at the dignity scheme. But that kind of brings us to the end of talking about the dignities. We've talked about Saturn and Mars, the malefic co-rulers via domicile and exaltation of Capricorn. We also have the moon in detriment, and we have Jupiter in fall. What kind of closing statements do you guys have about Capricorn, about these planets, or about any ways that people can kind of think about what's going on in Capricorn in their own charts? Whitney?
I don't know why I feel like I'm on the spot. We do this every episode, so
Sarah?
No, I'll go first. I'll go first. Totally. You know, I love Capricorns so much.
Thank you.
With my whole heart, all of you people. And that comes down to, regardless of the planets you have in Capricorn and their dignity, strong Capricorn placements show so much dedication to their people, to their work, to their service. And I think that there is really this secret here of tapping into Capricorn energy. And whether you are like me with one little outer planet in Capricorn, the way I hone into that Capricorn energy is, I think, the same way a lot of Capricorn people channel it, is by becoming as dedicated and, dare I say, disciplined as possible at whatever it is you are looking to accomplish. Because with any heavy Capricorn placement, there is always a sense of accomplishment, right? It's like I'm seeing the Ten of Cups, right? We're always looking to accomplish that feeling of legacy, right? The what you've created lasts and makes a difference. And I think that for those who either struggle with their Capricorn energy or who want to, turn the dial up, hone into those acts of dedication and discipline, and it will come.
I think Capricorn is by far the best sign of the
Of
zodiac.
course.
So, no, I do love being a Capricorn, and I love everything that everybody has shared today on this episode. I don't really want to add more about the planets. I just kind of want to give a message to my fellow Caps or Cap placements and just say that you probably have space to take a pause and give yourself more credit, to feel a sense of pride and self-respect, and to also not take yourself too seriously. And if you feel yourself micromanaging the people in your life, that neurotic Capricorn, um, beautiful part of us, it's probably a sign that you need to come back into your body, come back into putting your effort into something for yourself. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
I think for me as a Capricorn and what I wrote down to share is just encompassed in this story that I was living in Denver on my Saturn line. I was dating a Capricorn stellium and he got a motorcycle. Great. And it was like 90 degrees. I had full gear on. We're on Pikes Peak, which is kind of the edge of the world. You're like 14,000 feet in the air. And we're on these narrow little roads on this motorcycle. And I remember we had a traffic jam of straight up mountain goats. Like we got stopped by mountain goats. It was one of the most Capricorn experiences of my life because I was sweating, I was terrified, I was hungry. My nervous system was so out of whack on the back of it was not like a meant for two cruise motorcycle. It was mortal peril every moment of the drive. And I was so out of whack. And these goats are treacherously climbing. You've never seen a goat with a concerned face or with a nervous system dysregulation issue. It was such a foundational experience. And that happened. And I ended up going to therapy and doing EMDR and learning a lot of somatic techniques to regulate my nervous system. And that feels like the moon medicine that Capricorn needs so much, regulating the nervous system. That has been the single most impactful thing for fighting against the impatience and the stress and the terror of being a Capricorn. And creativity goes in there too as a lunar medicine for what's happening in Capricorn. So take a page out of the goat books, regulate your nervous system. You've never seen a goat sweating. You see goats acting stupid, but but not sweating. And that is our Capricorn Dignities edition of Weekend Wisdom. Thank you so much, Sarah Posh, for joining us. Why don't you tell everybody first and foremost how and where they can find you and engage with your brilliant Capricorn stellium?
Oh, thank you. Yes, you can find me at my website, which is just sarahposh.com. I'm also on YouTube. I have the Cozy with the Cosmos weekly podcast, new episode every Thursday. We just had the Cancer full moon horoscope and card reading episode come out this week, so that's exciting. And then on Instagram, it's just my name, Sarah_Posh. So you can find me in all those places.
Beautiful. Whitney?
Oh my gosh. Let me just plug Sarah's horoscopes real quick, you guys.
Sarah is the most talented astrologer making horoscopes today. I'm serious.
Seriously, if you have not checked out Sarah's horoscopes yet on her YouTube, what are you even doing? Get your ass over there.
If you're not
Okay.
there, you clearly don't want to know what's going to happen to you.
Yeah, exactly. But after you're finished with those, you can head on over to my little channel on YouTube, astro.arcana.astrology, where I cover each lunation of the month. You can also find me on Instagram at the same handle if you want to connect. And to book a reading, head on over to astroarcana.com.
Beautiful. As always, I'm the number 9 Lives Astrology, and I am 9livesastrology.com. I'm 9livesastrology on Instagram. I'm 9livesastrology on TikTok.
She's on
You
TikTok
heard it here first,
now.
boys. I'm on
This is the
TikTok.
big reveal.
Where else am I? YouTube. You know, I do Monday transits. I do all kinds of stuff. You guys can find and engage with us. Don't forget that Adam's channel is still taking donations to the Kickstarter, and they want to meet that goal of one more than last year. So help them do that. Head on over. That link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for joining us for Weekend Wisdom. Have an incredible month. We'll see you this time next month for Aquarius Dignities. Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.